Well, good evening. This is Hound Dog Steve coming to you on the 28th of April, which is a Saturday evening. And boy, oh boy, do we have some great stories about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies this evening. There has just been a whole flurry of activity, hasn't there? And so I'm going to bring you a story about Christine Lagarde, and also I would like to talk about in Finland, their basic universal income has fallen apart, and the government is no longer supporting it. It seems to have lost interest and is refusing any further funding. So anyways, let's flip over to these articles, and then when we come back I want to offer my own personal opinion of basic universal incomes and how one of the big problems with them. Okay, so let's go take a look at those articles, and we'll be back in a minute. Well, I couldn't resist having this as an opening slide. Bitcoin 9,380 as we speak, and Ethereum 686, and Litecoin 152. So these are all coming back. Okay, so first story. Christine Lagarde. Bitcoin boosted by IMF chief Christine Lagarde's praise. Okay, so Christine Lagarde is the head of the International Monetary Funds. Lagarde sees more prominent role for crypto blockchain. The digital currency community got some good news late Monday when Lagarde outlined the benefits of Bitcoin and the blockchain technology. In a blog post, Lagarde said cryptocurrencies have the power to minimize transaction costs, while the technology that underlies these cryptocurrencies could improve efficiency and increase safety. Crypto assets enable fast and inexpensive financial transactions whilst offering some of the convenience of cash. Some payment services now make overseas transfers in a matter of hours, not days, Lagarde wrote in the April 16 post. The underlying technology of crypto assets, distributed ledger technology or DLT, could help financial markets function more efficiently. Self-executing and self-enforcing smart contracts could eliminate the need for some intermediaries, she said. Lagarde's comments came as digital currencies are making a comeback. Bitcoin rose by as much as 20% last week, recording back-to-back weekly gains for the first time since 2017. Smart contracts self-executing, this is EOS and Ethereum. Jamie Dimon regrets his Bitcoin is a fraud statement. Mr. Bartiromo, who carries the distinction of having a Joey Ramone song written in her honor, began, "Let me ask you about Bitcoin, because that was another famous statement you made, that it's a fraud." Mr. Dimon perked up, interrupting, "Which I regret making," he smiled, punctuating with his left hand. He insisted the blockchain is real. You can have crypto dollars and yen and stuff like that. ICOs, you have to look at every one individually. So here we have Jamie Dimon eating his words, spoke too soon. There you go. Now this is the Finland abandons basic income experiment after 2 years. And at the top here it says, "I felt a great disturbance in the farce, as if millions of socialist voices suddenly cried out in terror and were suddenly silenced. I fear something rational has happened." With high-profile champions such as Richard Branson, Facebook boss Mark Zuckerberg and Tesla CEO Elon Musk backing the idea of governments giving non-working people money from working people to do nothing, what could go wrong? Well, 2 years after enthusiastically beginning its experiment with a universal basic income in which people are paid an unconditional salary by the state instead of benefits, Finland is abandoning the project as government enthusiasm wanes and additional funding requests are rejected. As a reminder, the Telegraph explains universal basic income is a form of cash payment given to individuals without means testing or work requirements. In some models, this is at a rate sufficient to cover all living expenses. And the proponents argue that the lack of expensive means testing leads to a higher proportion of the budget going to recipients. This would be more efficient. The transparency of universal payments would drastically reduce the need to detect benefits fraud. One scheme could replace the current complex arrangement of government benefits, rebates and tax rebates. Work will always benefit recipients of this welfare rather than the benefits trap that leaves part-time workers. The critics argue universal basic income may be inflationary, and in attempting to move all individuals out of poverty, it may simply raise the level of the poverty line. It may reduce the incentive to work, and studies have found some evidence to support this. A reduction in taxable income would reduce the government's ability to recover other expenses such as healthcare. Universal income as a policy dates from at least Thomas Paine's 1795 Agrarian Justice. It is currently more closely aligned with left-wing politics, where it would be funded through income from nationalised assets. So here we go, the universal basic income. I don't think it'll work. I don't know how we're going to resolve the inequities in our society, but as I say, resolving the inflation issue would be a huge step in the right direction. You know, what this really reminds me of is, you imagine coming home to your house and you see there is water all over the floor. And so you get out the mops and buckets and you start cleaning up, and you are cleaning and you are doing one hell of a job. In fact, you're the best cleaner and water mopper up there is known to humankind. And yet still you can't get it cleaned up. And the answer is because you've got to turn off the tap. Okay, it's the tap that's the problem. And as long as that tap is running, there will be water pouring on the floor and your work will be all for naught. So the inflation, of course, is the tap, and that is what we have to turn off. And finally, just quickly, this is what I'm going to in Las Vegas, Money 2020, the world's largest payments and financial services innovation event. There are going to be just absolutely tons of speakers. Anyway, it looks really interesting. There will be 11,000 attendees, including more than 1,700 CEOs and presidents from over 4,500 companies and 85 countries. And I'm sure that Max Keiser and Stacey will be there, and I'm hoping to do a little interview with them because I am huge fans of Max Keiser and Stacey Herbert, and I recommend you go watch them on they do the Keiser Report, which is on Russia Today, another great little news station. And of course, whilst I'm down in Las Vegas, I will be taking my camera, and Kevin, my newfound crypto friend, Kevin Moore, we're putting together some meetups, some info sessions here in Canada, but we will be going down and we'll be doing some interviews of as many people, going to as many seminars as possible, and I'll be videoing the most interesting parts and bringing that to you as well. So this is going to be a very exciting year. Well, there you are. I am pretty excited about going to Nevada in the fall. I know it's a little ways away, but I will need to save up some cashola to be able to make that trip. Anyway, it falls around my birthday, which is the 24th of October. So yes, it will be nice to take a week's vacation and go and take a look at the center of the cryptocurrency storm, the eye of the storm. Yes, sirree. Anyway, the basic universal income, it's a great idea, and I know that it helps to stave off some of the inequities in our society. But what I find fascinating about these initiatives, and basically everyone else who seems to want to analyze and offer discourse on the financial system and how we should resolve it, never seems to address the underlying problem, which is inflation. Okay, so these people who claimed the benefit, of course, had to be in some way collecting benefits already, or in a low income situation, and so because their incomes hadn't been keeping up with inflation to begin with, as soon as they got that money, of course, it just went into the void. It went into all of those things that they should have been buying, you know, like minimum things like new shoes, maybe spectacles, clothing, this kind of stuff, you know, which they just couldn't afford before. So of course they're not going to use it on some kind of employment initiative. They're just going to take it and spend it because they're so far behind the eight ball. And as you could see in the article about Finland, you know, the cost of living is very, very expensive, and it is becoming very expensive here in Canada too. So I suspect that this experiment is taking place in Ontario, and one part of that experiment is in a town called Lindsay, which is just a little way south of me, is going to show the same kind of results, that it just didn't pan out quite the way you might, you might find one or two people who are just in that sweet spot where they can take advantage of this extra capital, maybe put it into some kind of investment in a small business and so on and so forth. You know, they found that the microloan business has netted incredible results in self-employment and that kind of thing. But the big thing that is never addressed is inflation. And I'm going to show you a chart here of how the banking system works, the fractional reserve system. And as long as we operate under fractional reserve, you know, its inherent flaw is inflation, and that is why it has to keep going faster and faster and faster to keep up with this snake that's basically devouring itself. And so, you know, our fractional reserve, unrestricted fractional reserve, now that we've gone off the gold standard, is now hanging itself by the very noose that it created. And so this is why cryptocurrencies are actually urgently needed. You know, if we're going to have any kind of a soft landing when fiat suddenly hyperinflates, and it will do, it is going to hyperinflate. And when that happens, boy oh boy, you are going to see cryptos will be so desirable, because they fill that gap, they fill that perfect need where they are independent, they are trustworthy, they cannot be altered, and they are cheap, convenient, and quick. Okay, as much as I like gold and silver, we're not going back to a gold and silver payment unless it can be digitalized somehow, where the gold is the backing. You know, maybe it'll be Bitcoin gold, who knows. Now, the other interesting thing, I was watching a Max Keiser interview earlier today. So Max Keiser was interviewing, his name is Hate Sohini from Hosho.io, and I mean, he's talking about these security and auditing of smart contracts, but basically predicting that the future of cryptos is going to be side chains, i.e. these will be other blockchains built on Bitcoin, Litecoin, or Ethereum blockchains. Okay, and this is why, you know, when I talk about investing in cryptos, those are your three best investments: Bitcoin, Litecoin, and Ethereum, because every time you have a hard fork or a side chain, you will get an equivalent amount of currency in that side chain. So you're kind of automatically investing in any side chain that comes along. And so this is a great free investment. Just like, you know, if you had any Litecoin at the hard fork, you got 10 times. They offered you 10 times the Litecoin Cash for the amount of Litecoin that you had in your possession. So no, the future of Bitcoin and the Ethereum, Litecoin are basically assured. And with the problems, the inherent problems going on in the fiat system, you know, this is going to be, I think it seemed like a lifeboat, and I think this is why the IMF is talking positively now about Bitcoin as a possible rescue mechanism. And of course, you see, this is the huge thing about cryptocurrencies, is that they are counter-inflationary. Every cryptocurrency has a finite number of coins, a finite issuance. So you cannot inflate that currency beyond The only factor that you can change within that is the price of the currency. And so that's what you're going to see with all of these currencies is price fluctuations up and then stabilization, but you cannot inflate, you cannot do fractional reserve, and that is why blockchain and Bitcoin, Ethereum and Litecoin are absolute saviors for the little guy and the little woman, or maybe I shouldn't say it, but the little person, maybe that's the way to say it. So as I say, the big problem with universal basic income is inflation. Okay, inflation is everybody's enemy. It is this secret slayer of your wealth. And it is done by the banking system through fractional reserve. So under fractional reserve, they can, for every $1 they have in their hands, they can lend out 9. This is highly inflationary, which inevitably leads to the Minsky moment. This is a theory developed by Hyman Minsky, and this is where your interest costs start devouring the growth of your economy from debt-based financing. So until you resolve the inflation problem, you are never going to resolve the poverty problem. Not even come close. Because these people, like everybody, is just running faster and faster and faster to catch up with inflation. They're avoiding the true inflationary figures through a thing called hedonics, which massages the inflationary figures. So instead of having a steak in your bread basket, you have hamburger, and instead of having a nice long French stick, you end up having Texas toast, and this brings down the cost of your food because they're not comparing now apples to apples, they're comparing apples to oranges. And of course the other thing too is they start factoring in things like electronic goods, and of course the cost of electronic goods have fallen off a cliff, and this brings down the average. So basically, by my reckoning, that real inflation is running about 6%, 6.5%, and not the 2 to 2.5% that the government is trying to pretend that it is. Well, of course you can't keep up. Of course that extra money that you're receiving as a basic universal income is going to just get, like I say, dragged into spending that should have been going on and hasn't been going on. So maybe there is a slight return to the system, to society, by people spending that money back into circulation, but it's still not great stimulus. And of course, as it said in one of the concerns, was that there was an inflationary factor too, just that money chasing, more money chasing the same amount of goods. So I don't think it'll work. I don't know how we resolve this problem, but like I say, I think removing inflation, or as much as possible removing inflation from the system, would be a great first start. And in Canada, we can actually do this. The Bank of Canada is a publicly owned central bank. We can disconnect ourselves from the Bank of International Settlements and start doing what we used to do, what we did do from 1936 to 1972, which is print our own money, lend it to the government at 0% interest, which is then spent into circulation through make-work projects. And God alone knows there is enough infrastructure to repair and rebuild right across this country. We have the resources, we have the labor, and we have the technology to build every single thing that we need within the borders of Canada. I'm not saying that we should shut ourselves off from the rest of the world. We can trade backwards and forwards, but we can meet our own needs from within this country, and we don't have to inflate our currency to do it. Okay, this is going to happen anyway. As the fiat currency collapses, each country is going to go back to its own currency base, and that will be traded back and forward through Bitcoin into other currencies for trade purposes. So this is going to happen anyways, and I sure wish Canada would get ahead of the curve and realize that this could so easily be done. Anyway, Keep your little pecker up. This is great news for Bitcoin. This is great news for cryptocurrencies. Please do your research when you are investing in any of these altcoins. And as I say, if you stick with those 3 basic coins, every time there is a hard fork, you are going to get rewarded with some of that currency. And so this is like a little extra bonus on top of your investment. Okay, so this is Hound Dog Steve signing off. I hope you liked this information. If you did, please like and subscribe below. Press that big red button and subscribe. That really helps me when you do. And we'll be talking to you very, very soon. You take care. You have a great weekend now. See ya.